I feel like EMIR is only starting now.
Okay.
Because now all of this really interesting stuff. Because you have to remember when you're starting out, you're like a 4th division football club, you know? And you want to hire the best people and you want to be able to invest in X, Y, and Z, but you simply don't have it. I just bootstrapped the whole thing. I didn't take money off anybody. I just organically grew the business. Very old school, very boring. I had my savings.
No investors.
No
nothing.
investors, nothing. 100%. I own the business. And now we've brought business partners in where they have businesses within the businesses, which is fantastic.
Of course.
But that's a very kind of old-fashioned way of doing it. But then
I think because of the nature of the business, let's say go back in hindsight, would you have approached investors, and what would investors say to your ideas? Because it's not an app, it's not a...
Yeah,
you know,
I would say no. I invest in a lot of businesses and I would say no to my business,
Yeah.
And in a way, the really interesting stuff is happening now.
Yes.
Right? In terms of, we've brought on about 15 managing directors, partners with areas and very specific, very niche expertise, very interesting people. And Dr. Noah oversees that. And, you know, these are ranging from investment bankers, an MI6 spy, security analysts, experts in kind of human capital, a whole bunch of really interesting, high caliber former government officials, global CEOs. We're bringing these into the business. And then we're working on some projects at the very top of the country where you're able to give very precise expertise rather than what they're getting a lot of the time.
Which is a general
Which
research.
is a bunch of 25-year-olds with MBAs and slide decks, very bright MBAs and whatnot. But so that's where we're able to remain quite boutiquey and niche and we're working on some really interesting projects in that space. And that's only really in the last 18 months or so. And we still have a lot of work to pull all that together. But I'd say by the end of the year that will be pulled together. And every person now that we see, it's like drinking from a fire hose, you know?
Oh, wow. Okay.
Everything is an opportunity. So there's a network effect of the network effect that's taking place.
It's like like the J curve has kicked in for you.
Yeah. But now it's also creating challenges in terms of every process you've made, the business is breaking those processes.
Of course.
So there's a lot of flux and change.
How many employees are there now total on your payroll?
This is an interesting question because Noah and I were just chatting the other day and he's like, I'm going to hire 9 people. And I'm like, oh, okay, so we need to make that happen. So I guess with these, what we call our EAPs, we're up to about probably 40 people now.
Now, on your payroll?
Yeah.
Okay, that's substantial for a company that...
Well, it's really, we don't want to become a large company based on headcount.
Yes. So you're lean, you're based on freelancers, I'm assuming, outsourcing?
No, what we're working on is we're trying to create businesses within the business with a former government official, a former global CEO, like very high caliber individuals who then we go into our network and help them with things that haven't been done before. Right. So there's, one is a big project that will be the biggest project in the UAE when it's announced. And that is something that has never been done before. And you need people like Dr. Noah.
Concept of SMEs, which is the subject matter experts. So your business model is based on subject matter experts who are...
One element of it will be, to a certain extent, these the
project base probably.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a lot of interesting stuff happening in there, but we only want to play in a very niche area. I think a lot of people are obsessed with saying I have, 1,000 employees. I couldn't think of anything worse.
I did a study.
You should be focused on what's your profitability.
Exactly. It comes with its own, because usually the highest bottom line, the highest element that sucks your bottom line is payroll and headcount, 100%. But I did a study the other day, last week, and I said, okay, if I want to, in 5 to 10 years, sell this company, let's say Aximind, for $300 million, I need to be making at least $50 million a year at 40% at least EBITDA or net, and then with a growth rate of 20% annually for the past 3 years, so to speak, just to make it quantitatively easy. And that matched with a headcount of 50. So we have 50 employees, 3 or 4 seniors, C-suite, let's say CFO, CMO, CIO, so to speak. And then you have analysts, you have researchers, which is the brain of your organization, and then you have everybody else. So it counted to 40, 50. So the number that you've mentioned exactly is what I've reached. And that had, I think, $8 million annually as in cost for headcount. And then with the overhead of OPEX and all of the projects potentially, it will be around 12 million for a potential revenue of 50 million.
My advice, if there's a way that you can build a platform that creates a network effect, which is the hardest part of it, unfortunately, then what you can do is bring people in at little or no cost to you to give them access to that network effect with effectively their own business that you go into business with them on.
Yeah.
And then profitability changes quite dramatically. But that's the tricky part.
I think that's very, very tricky for 2 reasons. First, in this part of the world, the network is not as effective, I think, and this is my anecdote, obviously, as let's say in Europe and the States, let's say the West in general.
Well, why do you think that?
People here have this PR element, have this marketing, have this personal brand that they have to look after. Like you see someone, the moment you switch a camera on, the person changes. And their online presence has to be pristine, has to be exquisite to a point where most of my, let's say even here in this podcast, I have at least 60 to 70% rejection rate from people I know personally. And that's because they're associated with either their own personal brand, because they're obviously at the CEO or CXO level, or the organizations they're part of. If you look at their counterparts in other parts of the world, they go into podcasts, long form, they're chill. Obviously, I only know what I see online from that part of the world. But the thing is, there's an element of saving face. There's a cultural, let's say, preservation, personal preservation or personal image preservation that they're always afraid of. Like I get a lot of people that ask me, okay, can you send me the questions before? Do I need media training for this podcast? Like, no, this is not a journalist sort of interview. It's just a casual discussion, 2 friends or 2 colleagues or 2 professionals just talk to each other. And I'm really interested in the ideas, in the opinions, in the knowledge, in the experience of you, not your organization, not your brand, not your alter ego, you as an individual. And that is what I'm trying to, let's say, dig deep into. But when I mention that, then things go south. And
are these people, out of curiosity, are they founders of their own business, or are they typically working for a multinational?
Mostly, yeah. Mostly they're not founders. Yeah.
Yeah. So when you're working, because most of our clients, about 70%, I'd say, are multinationals.
Yeah.
The other 30% are, family trading conglomerates, government-related entities, government officials. And when you're the CEO or the regional CEO of a multinational, you won't get sacked by not doing a podcast.
Yeah.
So,
that's true.
So they have to be a little bit more mindful. And then you could obviously target specific multinationals where there is the service they provide, like a professional service.
Yeah.
They're more inclined to come on.
But I'm interested in that experience, and that's why the network effect is a bit difficult, because if you see let's say in in Europe, let's talk about Europe or even the UK, you can sense that there's a bit of an okay, I'm talking about the culture in general. So it's not their fault, by the way. It's the fault of, or not fault per se, it's the nature or the characteristic or the trait of the culture in this part of the world. The way people look at people in authority, people in power, and then how they need to work hard to preserve that. And the least thing that they could do can just change that. Whereas in the West, or let's say in the UK and the US, that's not as fragile. I don't know. That's my anecdote.
I don't know. Let's stress test that a little bit, right?
Yeah.
Because if you look at what's happening in Europe and North America, and there seems to be the narrative, at least, there seems to be this hyper judgmental society where everybody is polarized. There's a polarization in the world, whether it be, you know, at a social level, a political level, even at a global level from a geopolitical perspective. Even then, when you just think of global North versus global South.
Yes.
But when you look at society in the West, there seems to be this hyper-judgmental society where everybody's reverting back into their own little bubbles and then just shouting at the other bubble that they're being cancelled because they said something wrong, right?
Yes.
And I think this is one of the great things about Dubai.
Yes.
Is that we don't have that.
We don't at all. And that's an interesting point you're bringing here. There is. And I think the challenge that's, at least I perceive, and obviously perception is projection, so probably I'm projecting that, is that it's not the judgment. There's almost zero judgment in this part of the world. And I agree with you. It's the tolerance to judgment and the tolerance to perception judgment. If you're in the West, your tolerance for people to judge you is very high. Like, you know what? Say whatever you want to say about me. I'm Tucker Carlson. I go meet Putin. I don't care, right? Here, by mere having a selfie with an individual and then posting it online can cause someone a couple of, discomfort, let's say, generally speaking. So the tolerance for judgment is much lower here simply because the tolerance for conflict is very low here. And I know this because culturally speaking, at a macro culture level, it's very difficult for someone to reject a request. And that's why the inshallah culture.
Nobody says no.
Yeah. Nobody says no. And no to them is inshallah. I'm sure you heard about this, inshallah. So when someone says inshallah, you know that, you know what, he's just being courteous. They don't want to say no because they're afraid of conflict or rejection.
Well, there's also a politeness to it as well.
Yes, and it's a perceived politeness because in objective, abstract terms, it's the opposite, at least in my view. Like, I'd rather say no to someone than to leave them hanging, unless I'm from the same culture and I understand, and that's fine. But someone from, let's say, from China wouldn't understand that, okay, maybe means no. For example, that's, and if you scale that at a cultural level, you see that networking is extremely difficult. Like I was just having a meeting the other day with a colleague of mine in Central Europe, and he's also recruiting people for his podcast. And we exchanged notes, and he said it's not as difficult as you're making it sound like. I'm like, how's that? What's your method of inviting people? It's like, I do this, I do that. I have a couple of engagement managers, and you know what? I send them personalized messages and letters and so on and so forth. It's like, I've done all of that. And on top of that, I have personalized videos. That's high production. That's sent to them. And yet I've been rejected. Now, obviously nothing personal, 100%. It's just a matter of that element of circling back to how difficult to network with people.
I think there's a factor here that is both advantageous and disadvantageous. And there's a high, in my experience, right? There is a high demand for trust in this part of the world. And that can be hugely beneficial because that's why I say with my business, it took 10 years to build a network, right? And you do that just by trust. And that's why I'm saying, and how do you build trust? In my experience, and I was thinking about this the other day, because I'm asked a lot, like, how did you create a network from practically nothing, right?
Yes,
I had connections.
Yes.
And I think a lot of it is doing people favors without recognizing yourself that you're doing them a favor and not asking for anything in return for years and years and years. That's how you build trust.
So it's time.
It takes time, and I wouldn't even think of it in a strategic way like that, as in this is what you need to do. But
gotcha.
Maybe with the benefit of retrospect looking back, that's what was happening. People ask me for something. Maybe I'm high on that side of my personality assessment alone, right? I'm not tough on my personality assessment. If you look at my personality assessment, I'm not a tough person, right? I tend to be high in compassion, and I'm not tough. And for me, I need to work at bringing this up, right? But I also recognize that has actually been beneficial, because I'll do things for people without even recognizing I'm perhaps doing it.
It's like you're crediting in the social bank. And
exactly. And you do that for long enough, and people say, not talking about myself, but say, Sam is a good guy. And people say that to one another.
Yes.
And this is where I'm saying the requirement, the demand for trust is high here.
Yes.
Once you get that, why am I sitting here? It's Randa.
Yes.
Randa, who runs the University of Manchester. Randa, I think the world of. I know her 10 years. She supported me at the start of my journey. So Randa could ask me anything, literally anything. Will you do this for me? Without finishing the sentence, I'll do it. Whether she was my client or not. Forever.
Yes.
There's a reciprocal nature to all of this. So I feel like that's an important aspect of it. From spending time with you, anyone in my network now, who wants to do a podcast, I would say you should do that.
Yes.
And I think that's where the requirement for trust is high here, which can seem like a barrier. I've spoken at a lot of events internationally, particularly for investors coming into the Middle East. And there's always this, what sounds like kind of a cliche, trite piece of advice that someone mentions at these conferences. And that is, you really need to build trust in the Middle East. And of course, that's true anywhere in the world. You need to build trust. But, and I think it goes over a lot of people's heads, but there's a lot of validity to it, as in there's a period of just interacting with somebody, and you can look at them in the eyes and see, I can do business with this person, or I want to spend time, because once you've made a little bit of money, then it's like, who am I spending time with?
Yes. You have to be selective, obviously, because time is the commodity that is scarce, not money. Once you have money. But here's a curveball. And that's where I think that the dichotomy between here and, let's say, in the States or in UK or in Europe. And I've spoken to a lot of entrepreneurs and investors, and they say it's easy to raise funds, let's say in Silicon Valley or in the Netherlands or in the UK. Like, sometimes tenfold easier than it's raising this here in this part of the world, whether it's UAE, Saudi, GCC, generally speaking. So this is one. Getting access to investors, getting them to accept raising. This is one. Second, the difficulty of dealing with investors here, as per obviously my anecdote, which is personal dealings, and my circles of entrepreneurs, is also that much harder. I mean, I've mentioned this before in a previous podcast, and there's horror stories about how investors deal with and treat with founders. And one of the stories, and this is a close friend of mine, he said, sometimes my investor comes and waits for me at my office 8 a.m. on Monday morning to see if I'm coming to the office. And I'm like, your investor does that? I mean, so what? What if you're in a meeting, or it's like, he doesn't know. To him, I must show up to the office, and I must... And that level...
that's just a psychopath, though. That's a one-off anecdote.
That's obviously an extreme, and I agree with you. And 100% that's not a representative sample by any stretch of the imagination. That's 100%. But the point is, raising funds here is that much harder. And it goes back, and again, whether that's psychopath or whether it's generally speaking, it goes back to trust.
But it does. And I guess there's 2 points to that if you break that down and dig a little bit deeper into it.
And let me add to that. Yeah. It's not lack of capital.
Well,
that person is multi-billionaire.
This is what I was just about to say, right? It depends. There's 2 things, right? Obviously on fundraising, in terms of the life cycle, the Middle East is only coming to life on this side of things, right? Then the second part is it depends on what level of investor you're going into, because the institutional investors here, if you go up the road in Abu Dhabi, it is becoming the capital of global capital. Like it is the new Wall Street in many ways. This is where, I was in Abu Dhabi the other day and at the Investopia conference. And if you look at who is there, it is
the who's who.
The who's who. So in terms of institutional investors, the UAE in many ways, and if you look at the investment that's coming from this part of the world out globally, and whether it be from sovereign wealth funds or the likes of Mubadala, etc. These are highly sophisticated investors. So
that's a different scale, though.
Yeah, well, this is the scale I'm talking about, right? Yeah. So for these guys, these are some of the most sophisticated investors in the world. If you're talking about the startup scene,
yes.
Yeah, I wouldn't be.
Which is the kind of the masses, right?
Yeah, I'm in an angel investor kind of group, and I don't know, based on my interactions on that, which is run over a WhatsApp group, and you see how fickle investments can be. One person comes in and says, I like the sound of this. And it's like, yeah, there you go. And you're looking at a slide deck.
That's it.
You're very quickly going to the back of the slide deck and seeing who the person is. You're checking them out and you're checking out the ID and you're thinking, okay, has this person done this before? Okay, they have or they haven't. Do they look like somebody that could do it? Then you're looking at the idea, the addressable market. You're thinking, but it's
how common is that? Let's say
it's gambling. Like literally, that is.
But that's what investing is, isn't it? Because
at the angel side, definitely.
Yeah.
And one of the guys in that group who is a very successful guy here, who he runs a big multinational here, and I was saying to him, we could probably look at bringing this into EMIR, into the network, for fundraising, just as an idea, not necessarily going to do it. And it kind of ties in with what you were saying earlier on in terms of the risk profile of people with their reputation, and you seeing this headwind against perhaps people being as accepting for what they may risk by appearing on a podcast or anything like this.
Yeah. Long form.
And he said to me, because obviously, let's be honest, there's a lot of money sitting in that network, right? And he said to me, do you know what? And he comes from that world, but originally he was a consultant, a very sharp guy. And he said, I don't think it would make sense, because a lot of these guys they have money, but they come from quite an institutional world of working, say, for a multinational. And what you want, he said, is like people like you,
founders,
who see a slide deck on a WhatsApp group, who are like, yeah, okay, there's X amount, and you roll a dice. And he said, what we don't want is people asking questions, like not questions about, obviously,
the market fit.
You're entitled to ask questions about the proposition and get on a call with them if you want. But questions after that, after you've put your money in, it should be like you're rolling the dice.
Yes.
If that comes back in X amount of time, and obviously they give their investor updates, and that was quite an interesting realization for me. It's like, yeah, you don't want those people who are turning up to your office on a Monday morning saying, "Where's my money?" And I ran into somebody in the lobby of a hotel yesterday evening, a mutual friend who we'd both invested in this business. And he said, how is X, Y, and Z? And he said, how is that? And I know the guy, I'm closer to him. He said, I invested in that. And I said, oh yeah, how's it going? And I said, no, it seems to be doing really well. He's doing a great job. And he's like, oh, I just haven't heard from him in a long time.
Oh, they don't have board meetings?
No, they're not at that stage of a startup. Yeah.
Not yet. Okay.
They probably should be sending investor updates.
Yeah. I mean, it's a two-way thing, but the thing is, outside of the board meetings, outside of the kind of forecasting and the understanding of what's going on operationally, whether it's a development phase, whether it's a going to market phase, outside of those typical, obviously traditional way of updating the investors, which is a must to establish trust. Obviously, trust should be sort of in between assumed and earned when it comes to investor-founder relationship. But the challenge goes back to, in the investor side, it's 100% earned. So you have to work. So I'm leading to a friend of mine who's also a founder, and he was talking to me the other day, and he was saying, Osama, I'm 700K behind. I said, behind your plan? He said, no. I said, behind what? He's like, no, I'm deficit 700K. I was like, okay, minus. I was like, okay, is that in your plan? He said, yeah. I was like, okay, so you had an 18 months plan with your investor, and at this point in time, you were forecasting that you'll be 700K behind, as in deficit. He said, yeah. I was like, so what's the problem? He said, no, the investor doesn't like it. He needs to see a positive P&L.
Yeah.
And I'm like, but that doesn't make sense.
But that's why you have to be so careful about who you're selective about who you're bringing in. And it's like what I said about the guy I was telling you about who said, no, we need to be selective of who we let into this group, because what we want guys that can put in X amount of money and don't ask any questions after.
Yeah.
It's more just a curiosity. Oh, remember I done that? What's happening? Have they sent an email? And because otherwise, if you don't tie up with the right partners, they're just going to absorb so much of your time. Yeah. And this is, again, it's not fashionable, but if you can bootstrap your business yourself,
yes, 100%,
and suffer for like 5 years, not financially, you shouldn't be suffering that long, but suffer in terms of
long hours.
Yeah, long hours, and not being able to scale faster
for resources and others. Yeah.
It's like anything. It's an investment in a benefit that will come to you further down the line. When you're kind of 6, 7, 8, 10 years in, you don't have any.
You shouldn't have any problems. I mean, if you're 10 years and you're still having problems, you should either.
But I mean, you're not dealing with anybody that is going to be a headache for you. Investors,
because you have enough scar tissue to be able to have that experience with you,
and you just own the business yourself. You decide what you want to do. It's a beautiful thing.
It depends on what series you're at. Probably at 10 years, technically should be on your way to exit and probably IPO or just sell the business. More than that, you're either having an extremely healthy P&L that is on a growth trajectory that is clear, let's say 100% annually because of whatever reason, or you just plan your exit on 10 years. Because otherwise, like you said, you can't bootstrap for that long. You'll be burnt out. Yeah.
No, but it should be making a lot of money by then.
It should be, exactly. But then it goes back to another point, which is the growth. And I had a friend of mine who is having a fintech here at the IFC. And he said, Osama, after 5 years of me starting my business, I'm well off. The business is doing well. I have, I think, 50 or 60 employees. The one thing I wish I can go back to 5 years ago, where I worry about the tech, I worry about the actual development, the code. But he said 80% of my time is just people.
Yeah.
Just what keeps me up at night is people.
This is why I said earlier, it'd be a worse nightmare to have, I guess... I was going to say earlier, I said, having a business of 1,000 people, and I have a lot of friends that run businesses with a lot of people. And I'm thinking of one who I'm meeting later on today, they're thinking of their exit. And he's just dealing with so much.
He's a founder?
Yeah.
Okay.
And he's dealing with, there's a lot of headaches.
How many employees he has?
He has, I guess, around 300.
Oh wow, that's substantial.
In multiple countries, done a fantastic job.
That's borderline enterprise and beyond.
Yeah. I mean,
300. I mean, the inflection point for startups, as per academia, but also as per my practical experience, is 13. The point you go beyond 13, the 14th person that you hire, people start become as a founder, as a CEO, as someone who's running the operations. people start becoming your first problem, because people then go into factions, go into lobbies, and then they have their own behaviors and their own sort of values that usually is misaligned with the company value, and they have their own hidden agendas. And it's not bad people; they're all good people, right?
It's humans.
But it's exactly. And the thing that I see over and over and over again is that in this part of the world, people do not know how to handle this, and they think that it can be handled typically, as in, that easiest thing that you can ask anyone, a barber, a taxi driver, is about religion, politics, and people, right? I mean, anyone can speak about those, although they are the most difficult topics and the most sort of complicated and sensitive topics you shouldn't talk about unless you know what you're talking about. Culture, I feel on the business side, is the same thing. Leaders think that they know culture by mere fact of them leading people for X amount of time. What do you think about that? Is this something that rings a bell to you?
I don't know. I can only speak to my own experience with it and what a mess I made of it for such a long time, and that's partly comes back to that idea of, when you're starting out, you can only, depends on your resources, you could have a rich daddy and be, opening a muffin shop or something in Dubai Mall. But
we're not talking about those.
Yeah, if you're not in that situation.
Second generation wealth people are just sort of a different breed altogether.
That's a different set of challenges that they have.
Yes.
But from my own experience, it's more a case of when you're starting out, one, you have there's an awareness issue that you think you know more than you know, because we all assume that. Then pretty quickly you realize you don't. But you're having to make a lot of decisions all the time that have huge impact and ramifications of where you'll be in a year or two.
Yes.
And then you have limited resources in terms of, I'd love to be able to do A, but in reality, I can only really do F over here.
Yes.
And then you the learning curve starts to kick in. You start getting a little bit better. And then you get enough resources where you can do things properly. And for EMIR, that only happened, a few years ago, I'd say, maybe. Yeah, for a long time, I'd say I just made a mess of this.
But that's the thing. The introduction of new resources introduces capabilities and competencies and and capacity to your operations, but also introduces that sort of abstract metaphysical challenge to your organization, which is people.
Yeah.
With their own values, with their own behaviors, with their own aspirations, with their own. How do you? I mean, and I think what I was alluding to is you can't practice something without deliberate coaching or deliberate focus on the thing you're trying to find.
Exactly. You need to carve out time. We got an external consultant. It was actually, I was talking to, I don't know if you know, Amit, who founded Nexa.
Okay.
A marketing agency. They have offices in London, Dubai, I think New York as well. Amit's a fantastic guy. And I was having a chat with him and I asked him he's probably 10 years on from me in a way, right? Different businesses, but in terms of not his growth curve, but I guess just from an experience point of view as well. And he said, the big regret that I have is I didn't start the people and culture thing earlier because I thought I simply don't have the time and the resources. And that's exactly where I was at that time, where I was thinking, I don't have time, I don't have resources to do this properly.
That's an invaluable advice to you, probably.
And when he said that to me, he said two things which were very interesting, which I've mentioned to him, kind of reverberated around my mind. The second one, I haven't decided if that's the right thing to do, but that was the first one. And I thought to myself, okay, you need to take drastic action. If you feel like you don't have the resources and you don't have the time, you just need to create them.
Yes.
So I'd done that, external consultant, then hired a wonderful KG, our people and culture head. And along with him, the consultant came in, created where we want to go with this. Then I hired KG, and then he's somebody that is the personification of what you want your culture to be. very, very high on compassion, lovely guy, very driven, wants to get things done. Yeah, he's great. So you need that. You need obviously the founder's kind of vision of this is where we want to go, right? We know what our mission is and we know what our values are. Now let's create a whole system that allows us to do that and ensure that when we're hiring in the future, we have a system, we created a system that allows us to do that. So we created our mission, our vision, our purpose, our values. And then I sat down and I asked myself, okay, and I'd done this over the course of a summer. And I asked myself, okay, ideally, who are the type of people that I want to spend time with at work, right? And who obviously will have a positive impact on the business.
Yes.
And you want somebody first and foremost, you want somebody who's kind, okay? Because you want to be dealing with people that are nice to be around, who think, how can I help that person? Rather than what do I get out of this, you know?
Absolutely.
The second thing is you want them to be smart and you want them to be driven. You want them to have a growth mindset in a way where you mix with that kindness. You have this, you kind of can't go wrong if you're kind, smart, and driven. So based on that, then what I would do is everyone that we are hiring would do their personality assessment, obviously.
Yeah.
And to ensure that we don't just get, all the same type of person.
Yeah.
On the personality assessment, I think there's 11 criteria that I look at. So they'll do their screening for their skills and competence, right? Can they do the job? Then they would interview with KG and they do their personality assessment. And then if out of those particular 11 criteria, if they don't get at least 80%, then they get screened out. So I do the last interview, or I have up until recently, I was doing the last interview. They get they're out. And then, so I get a personality assessment. This is when we're usually down to 2 or 3 people. And one of these is getting the job. Basically, it's just
because it's easy to juxtapose those.
We're able to see everything. They've got their skills, their personality. And then the last one is I created these weird questions. And it's really just to stress test the personality to see if it's a good culture fit. Are they kind? Are they smart? Are they driven? And out of those 11 criteria that I look at, if they get to 80%, I do the interview. And there's a whole other bunch of criteria that I don't look at. So you get that randomness, you get different types of people in there. And then for certain roles, I'll look at some of the other criteria. If it's a manager role or a leadership role,
people interface.
Exactly. Are they able to do that? And then that last interview, the questions that we've created, it's done through a form that we've built to remove bias. And you're just asking everyone the same question and rating it. And the questions, in a way, I feel also then act as almost a recruitment tool, because they're checking if they're going to be the right fit for you as well, of course, and rightly so. And I feel like spending that time doing the interview with them, they get a kind of unique, it's an interesting interaction. I think it makes them curious about the company as well. That wasn't a standard kind of usual process. And that since we started to do that, which was a few years ago now, it's not perfect, right? Because you're bringing people together, so it's never going to be 100%. Perfect because we're not perfect as people. But it's much more like there's music flow.
So personalities usually are constant. So we love, we hate, the personality types, whatever it is that is defining us are more or less agreed upon that it's built into our gene, our DNA. Environment is a variable. Put personality into environment and then comes out behavior. Now, how many times did you have a brilliant guy that you thought is brilliant, you thought she's kind, you thought that they're fit, and then you bring them in, but then it's not?
Of late, since we started this process, that hasn't been the case. Okay. Now, I'm sure it will. We're hiring all the time, and there's a lot of people even just bedding in now. So I'm not saying you're wrong by any stretch of the imagination. And I think that feeds back in, Usama, to what you were saying, or what we were saying just about the flaws of humans, right? We're the aggregate of our strengths and weaknesses, really.
Yes.
And then obviously the environment that you're creating goes 100%. With that. And I make mistakes all the time, and I get things wrong all the time. Right? So that feeds into the machine then. You're trying to just kind of tweak the machine. And then there's then life gets in the way. You know, where something happened where you weren't expecting, and now you're flying back to Ireland all the time. You know, and you're back and forth.
When that happens, usually the least clear thing falls down the cracks. So let's say any organizations, and whether you're a founder, whether you're a CEO, whether you're a responsible for a big P&L and regionally, you have two things that usually, whether you are aware of them or not, they're there. You have strategy, so goals, KPIs, monitors, tactics, projects, all that sort of stuff, right? And then you have the culture, which is people, behavior, conflict, communication, teams, and all that sort of stuff. This is organic. This is clear cut. This is, so when you talk about strategy, it's clear. Excel sheet, where are we now? According to our plan, very clear. Why? You go down, you're kind, you understand why, you help people. You're not kind, people's are numbers to you on an Excel sheet. You just optimize your bottom line, basically speaking. When it comes to culture, it's the collective behavior of the group that makes an organization distinct. And that collective behavior is something that is not the sum of the individuals. So you can see, there's always my analogy is, if you can bring the superstars from the world in football or soccer, depending on which part of the world you are from, not necessarily they'll be the best team. Yeah. But then you have sometimes a superstar with a team, but all of them work in cohesion, and then you've got yourself, or even not even a superstar. I mean, there are many teams that made it to the finals and even won without even a single superstar, because the team is not the collection, or is not the sum of the individuals. There's something else. Organizations are on its own a living and breathing organism. So your point about the hiring and firing is very, very important. And obviously it's the most crucial part in making sure that the people that are there are fit for the culture. But then the maintenance of that environment is something that usually people, in my personal experience, and obviously according to academic studies, is missed, which is a corporate culture element. What do you think of that, according to your personal experience, but also the people, the leaders that you're working with? Is this something that bothers people, or you think that it's not brought to their awareness yet?
No, I think it is most certainly on the top of the radar, or on the radar of all the leaders in our network. We have a lot of conversations with them. And even Frank does this very interesting little kind of 60-second interview with our members. I used to do it, and he's taken it over. Frank is my colleague. He's the director of Boardroom, our network part. And we asked them 16 questions within 60 seconds, right? Just a nice kind of little sharp interaction for social. And within that, and then they go in a little bit deeper into some of the answers that they've given. I'd say in every single one of these that has been done, and there's a lot of them now at this stage, every single one of them, the leader is talking about culture. I'd also, there's other challenges that you've articulated, that interaction, but there's other challenges in terms of, particularly for big multinationals, just the size and scale, and post-COVID and going remote. There's a challenge in getting this right. And there's a malalignment in terms of expectations often between employees and employers, and it's not easy. And I think there's been a lot of progress in terms of the awareness of leadership in general to move in this direction. I don't think the very nature of business, unless you are in a remarkably niche, or you have this remarkably unique business model. You're essentially a monopoly and you're just printing money.
Yeah. We don't talk about those.
There's always going to be friction between this, and I think that comes down to human psychology as well.
Yes,
because there is a baseline, and like if I was working for somebody on a team, and as say the culture and the initiatives around people and culture improve, there is a readjustment of what the expectations and the baseline is for everyone that was there and everyone that comes in. Correct. Human beings we're wired that way.
We're malleable in a way that we have to be adaptable, otherwise we won't survive.
Yeah, and that can obviously, being adaptation machines is very useful for survival. But also our expectations adapt very quickly. We will complain about something, and then we'll be forced into some kind of harsh environment, and then go back to the original baseline environment, and everything seems great again. But if we don't take ourselves out of that harsh environment or into a harsh environment, I think we're just wired that way. And that's why we have to keep doing that. And that's why I think there'll always be friction in companies. And I think a certain amount of friction isn't bad.
It's healthy. Stress is healthy. I mean, it's the root of growth. Obviously, if you're playing sports, you have to stress your muscles to grow. And that's 100% true. I think the concept here is the disconnect, and you alluded to that earlier, the disconnect between what management think their employees feel or think and what employees actually are living. So for instance, I'll ask you this question, and obviously you can be as candid as you want it to be, but how many people do you know as leaders that think really at an assumption level within their hearts of hearts that everybody is replaceable?
Say that again?
So how many leaders do you know that you think that they have as a basic assumption within their own value system that everybody is replaceable?
I don't know. It's a difficult question to answer, right? Because I can't put myself in all those shoes. But I have 10 years of experience of dealing with CEOs every day, going for breakfast, lunch, giving them talks, and their talks for the global CEOs. And all I can say is there is this huge spectrum in terms of leadership. And I can think of interactions where you've got the head of a professional services firm saying to me at lunch, that they had basically sacked a huge cohort of their workforce. And I won't say the words that he used, but to say that he was pretty blasé about that was an understatement. It was pretty cold, to put it mildly, if not even got maybe a little slight sense that he might have even enjoyed it. And then there's people that would lose sleep about having to replace somebody.
Yes.
Now, whether everyone thinks everyone is replaceable, it's an impossible question to answer. But I think, again, you start drifting into human psychology.
Yeah.
And I think the ultimate motivation, there's a spectrum of motivation, but the ultimate motivation, when it really boils down to it, obviously, is at a certain point, it starts to impact that individual, that leader. How is that going to impact their life if X, Y, and Z is replaced?
Yeah.
And I think the larger an organization gets, and you see this with multinationals, the larger the multinational gets and the further away the CEO gets from the team, the propensity for layoffs increases.
Yes, 100%.
Because they are just numbers on it.
Because they don't have that connection with the human beings. They don't understand I wouldn't say the suffering, but they don't understand the environment that they're in. There's this massive wall between those elites of the organization and the working class within the organization, and it goes back to the environment.
But again, Osama, some of those leaders and CEOs would have been at the bottom of that organization at a certain point.
And they forget. Again, I'm talking about this part
This
of the
is
world.
a fascinating conversation. I'd actually say in this part of the world, I think I'd say in the West, it's a lot more clear, cutthroat.
Yes.
If you're when you think of Western markets, North America particularly, I think there's a propensity here. You have large family trading conglomerates who are effectively multinationals.
Mm-hmm.
You know, a multinational, the definition is they get X% of their revenue outside of the domestic market, right? You would have a whole bunch of family trading conglomerates, like huge legacy, incredibly successful businesses. And I get to engage with a lot of these as well. And I feel they are a lot more socially aware and conscious of the impact of their business and their legacy. And I'm not saying in all instances, but there's more of a sense of responsibility.
So here's a thought. So I 100% agree with you. There's an element, and I remember in one of the organizations I worked with, or I worked for, the leader actually had into consideration during the COVID times who has families and who is having dependents and the size of the dependents and who doesn't. And that was a factor for cuts, for layoffs. You remember, there was tough times in 2020, right? So it was a tough decision and people actually lost sleep over it. And I know firsthand that this was unequivocally true. But it's not the element that it's not. So that element, I agree with you. The other element is part of my research is that people judge the activities that they need to do based on the performance of the organization. Obviously, so the organization is not performing well, then they need to dig deep and understand what are the let's say the triggers, or what are the issues, and they try to assess and then do intervention methods. The challenge that I see, or kind of the research that I'm doing, is that in this part of the world, because the masses of the organizations or the workforce in organizations are expatriates, and by definition, expatriates left their home countries to come and work here with visas, a lifestyle. Maybe they have obviously debt because they have cars and home loans and whatever. And then that made them bite the bullet, put their head down and still perform in spite and despite having a misalignment with the organization and some sort of a culture that is incongruent with their own values. And that to me is a misleading signal to leaders, because leaders think that, oh yeah, I mean, my performance is good. I have a double-digit growth. Every time I have a meeting with the team, obviously because he's the leader, so there's this power distance and barriers that people always put. Naturally speaking, like you said, psychologically speaking, you always like to show your best face or your best side when you talk to your superiors, which masks all of that. So I'm not targeting leaders as being quote unquote vicious or ill-intentioned. That's not what I'm saying at all. It's just that they think
some of them are.
We're not talking about the 3% psychopaths.
Yeah.
That's 100%. Yeah, I agree with you. But when it comes to the feeling for people, there is that, and I agree with you. But because they don't know what to look for, usually they're oblivious about the whole concept, and they think that they know culture, and they think that they know. And my anecdote is, if you drive in Dubai on a Monday morning between 8 and 10, why is everybody aggressive? For example, I mean, again, that's my anecdote. I'm driving chill. I'm my own boss, so I don't care when I arrive. But if you drive between, and I invite the viewers even to comment on this and see if it's true, wherever they live, not just in Dubai, obviously. But if you drive on a Monday morning or the start of the week in your country, whether it's Sunday in Saudi or otherwise, between 8 and 10 on the first day of the week, how does streets look? If it's not calm, because you just finished a relaxing weekend, why are you aggressive on the morning?
But I think that itself, if you were doing a research observation would be multifactorial, and you're assuming everybody is living like you, where they're getting up at 4 a.m., having a coffee at 5 a.m., writing in their journal, going and working out, and everything else that you do for the rest of the day. You're not factoring in that the vast majority of people have not been looking after themselves, have been probably, let's just say, didn't get much sleep over the weekend. You know, I wouldn't pin that down to the fact that they're going to a job, and maybe they're going to a job that they hate and they don't like. And maybe they're going into a company where they hate the culture and they don't like that culture, or they just don't even have a culture and they don't even make an effort to have a culture. I would say to that person, it's up to you to take responsibility for your life and do what Osama does. Not necessarily getting up at 4 a.m., but, you know, get up at 6 a.m. And work out and eat properly and look after yourself and like do the basic stuff. The vast majority of people don't do the basics of just looking after themselves first. And we said this, I've fallen into this in the last 6 months because I got injured, and I can see it. I'm like a different human being. So to go back then to the culture part of it, yeah, for sure. I agree with you. There'll be some organizations where the CEO or the leadership of that company are making genuine efforts at having a progressive culture that is, you know, focused on how it is beneficial for all of the employees. But now we get into the debate of capitalism itself, because at the same time that leadership is being judged, whether they keep their job and they put food on the table for their family
100%
on what targets they hit. Because the shareholders, whether they're a listed company or whatever the structure of the business, they are on top. Everybody has a boss, right? And then you get into just how capitalism boils us down to economic units. And then we get into interesting philosophical debates of how we create a society. And you particularly look at what is happening around the world. Yeah. You know, you have a geopolitical recession with what is happening with Russia that is winning a war in Ukraine. You have the tragic events that are happening in Gaza. Yeah. You have the Red Sea attacks. Yes. You have what's happening in Sudan. You have what's happening in Myanmar. You have what's happening across the Sahel. You have tensions between the US and China. You have right-wing parties picking up a bit of steam in Europe. You have a pretty crappy global economy. You have maybe Trump coming back to power.
Oh, God.
Yeah. And that could lead to a trade war. You have a technology that is going to just transform the global economy that we're not ready for in terms of AI. The implications of that. You have the polarization that I discussed. You have extreme weather events. You have climate change. 1.5 degrees is dead. There's no chance we're hit 1.5 degrees. We're likely won't even hit 2.
And that's all on the shoulders of leaders, obviously, especially if they're multinationals,
but you have a fracturing of multilateralism at the same time. Yeah. You know, I was given a talk the other night, and the Irish Minister for Enterprise and Trade was in the audience, and he was also speaking. And I gave my talk, and I was talking about the direction of the world and where it was going. I was talking about a lot of these points. And then afterwards, he went up on the stage, and people were asking him, you know, what do you think of what Trevor was saying? He was saying, yeah, the world faces significant challenges. And what the point he was making, which I thought was very interesting, he's a very articulate guy, was with this fracturing of multilateralism, how do we collaborate to solve these problems? Yeah. Because we are living in a polycrisis environment. We have these interrelated risks that have a negative compounding effect on our prospects as a society. And somebody in the audience asked me, you know, Trevor, when you look he said, if you go back 50 or 100 years, the world faced significant challenges.
Absolutely.
And what's different about that today, really? Is it just that we're more aware of it? And I think when I heard that question, and I chatted to that guy afterwards, very bright guy, I just thought that's so depressing that we don't get why it's different now.
Mm.
You know, yeah, of course, a lot of the things I described, you know, geopolitical tensions, even if you go back 100 years, the rise of right-wing parties. But what is happening now is all of these crises are interrelated and they're impacting one another.
Yes. And the interconnectivity between the world and the sheer power of the guns, the weapons, the nuclear.
And if you think of some of those issues, think of, say, the geopol, the extreme weather events, supply disruption, global economy, inflation. You have Red Sea attacks impact the Suez Canal.
Mm.
Extreme weather events are impacting the Panama Canal now as we speak, because there's artificial reservoirs that are in drought because of that at the moment. That feeds into supply disruptions, which feeds into inflation, which feeds into the crappy global economy. Crappy global economy then feeds further into some of the geopolitical tensions that you're seeing. The extreme weather events, if you think of what's happening across the Sahel, you have this toxic mix of the legacy of colonialism, conflict, climate, and Europe in many ways and this is going to happen in the next 10, 20, this is not way off in the distance. This is coming up in front of us. It's already happening when you think of the extreme weather events that's happening around the world. And Europe, in terms of its ability to absorb these people, you're going to have hundreds and hundreds of millions of people who are, through no fault of their own, many of them didn't even contribute towards climate change, are going to do what is right for their family and try to move somewhere where they can make a living.
Sustain and survive,
which will be north.
Yeah.
And look at how Europe is dealing with immigration.
Yeah. They
vote for right-wing parties. So there's
So here's a thought, Trevor, and I love this macro level, because now we went from micro into macroeconomics, and obviously you're the expert in that domain. If I look at the world map and I look at innovation, and innovation, the radical type, the radical innovation is the predictor for a nation's prosperity and growth, and obviously it's the soul for welfare and general prosperity. At least sustained one, right? So you look at the West and you'll find that it's, innovations are coming from there. You look at the East, you find innovations coming from there. You look at the Middle East, especially the GCC, and it's a blind spot. There's no innovation coming from here. And it's not an anecdote. This is researched over and over and over again for tens and tens of years. If you look at the Global Innovation Index from the United Nations, we're trailing behind dramatically, right? And all the efforts that the governments have done, especially in Dubai, where the government have set a target back in 2015 that by 2021 we would be in the top 5 or even the top innovation city as Dubai in the world. And we couldn't achieve that, realistically speaking. Actually, we're trailing behind. We were 35 or 31 at the time. And now we're still within that vicinity. Juxtapose that with everything you mentioned now, all these political tensions, all of these economic instabilities, all of these weather conditions, all of these economies, wars, all of that. This part of the world does not have left and right. Socially, like we mentioned, and at a societal level, we're very cohesive. There's no tensions. And if I look at the drivers for innovation, academia, and generally speaking, you have 4 drivers of innovation: government, capital, talent, and culture. So government, we have the best governments in the world, according to studies and according to all the metrics. The trust factors is very high. Obviously, you look at the safety. If you look at what governments supposed to do, they're supposed to provide infrastructure, safety, medical, and general well-being for the society and facilitation of trade and economy and capitalism and all that sort of stuff. So that's a tick. Capital, obviously, there's an abundance of that here. Talent, the other day, we were rated as number 3 worldwide as talent magnet around the world. And then you've got culture. And that's my field of research, right? So if we don't have all of those extremely complicated issues around the world. We don't have those. And yet we're not innovating. I don't want to say we're not able or not capable, because definitely we are, but we're not innovating. First, what do you think about the concept of the innovation deficit within the GCC in light of that?
I think you're right to mention those 4 pillars, and this is your area of expertise, but I think there's one other thing for you to think about. And that is, and it's hard to disambiguate something that hasn't happened, right? The counterfactual. There's another thing that we would need to add to that list, perhaps, or something, at least something interesting for you to think about. And that is the opportunity cost. Okay? Because you think about it, as you rightly say, we're in Dubai, we focus on Dubai for this example. When you look at what Dubai has in terms of government, visionary leadership, there's capital,
there's
talent, and it's done a remarkable job in doing that. You ask yourself, why wouldn't you, maybe the assumption then is culture, right? That there's that.
That is an assumption, 100%, yeah.
But maybe there's another assumption to add into the mix, and that is the opportunity cost of easy money on the table. And another part is, how successful are you existing within an innovation deficit?
Yes.
Dubai
is there a need for it? Yeah.
There is, and the government is pushing it.
Perceived need, sorry. Yeah.
And I feel there is, right? If you look at some of the funds that have been even announced relatively recently, if you look at what Dubai Future Foundation,
100%.
There's incredible work being done from the government and in Abu Dhabi as well.
Long.
And focusing on IP protection and trying to increase patents. And I think there's a better job that needs to be done in linking up academia and industry.
Corporates and industry, yeah.
So there's definitely work that needs to be done. But you ask yourself, in any situation in human nature, when you have easy money on the table, think of Dubai in COVID. Right?
Yes.
Dubai done a remarkable job.
Textbook, exactly.
A remarkable job with COVID. But if there was ever going to be, and I feel they made, I would have made the same decision myself that they made. If there was ever a time to shift the model for the future, arguably, I'm sure those conversations were taking place during COVID, because if you were conspiratorial, if somebody was saying that we heard these whispers of this pandemic coming from the East, and if you were to dream up a pandemic that would damage a particular economy, it would be COVID and Dubai.
Yes,
right? Trade, transport, tourism, right? You couldn't think of anything worse. Yes, and particularly if you read British media over the last kind of 2 decades,
100%, yeah.
So many of them would have, they would have loved the idea of, as they would have described Dubai, as this kind of house of cards that here it is, the model is going to break.
Yeah.
And what happened?
Strengthen it even more.
Dubai came out, it handled the crisis so well, and it came out arguably one of the best places in the world. And I remember talking to during COVID, he was an ambassador at the time, but now he's a minister, and he rang me very kindly, an Emirati official, and he rang just to kind of check in during COVID, how's your family and all doing? And we had a kind of conversation where he said, we during this, we're looking to the West and how are they handling this and what's going on? And, you know, frankly, we all know what happened. It wasn't handled very well. And then the UAE handled it incredibly well. And that seemed to just, it was obviously, I don't want to be crass because there was people that went through untold heartache and losing loved ones and that. But purely from a model perspective, this seemed to just, in a way, be one of the best things that could have happened to the UAE because of how they handle it. And then to your point, in terms of becoming a magnet for talent and bringing people in.
And investors and high net worth. A
lot of people joined our network. A good example is there was a guy in London who was 39, one of the most successful people on the planet. And he said he had basically passed through Dubai thousands of times and wasn't interested in Dubai. Okay. He's in the kind of mining industry. And then he was in lockdown in London and came down to Dubai. And I had lunch with him in his villa on the Palm. And he was moving his whole holding company down after spending X amount of time in Dubai. Because a lot of people who wouldn't have necessarily thought of coming to Dubai experienced it and thought, oh, there's something for everybody here.
And that's not an outlier by any stretch of the imagination. No. That was an influx of people similar to that. Yeah.
So it's him multiplied by... So you had this huge multiplier effect that was a benefit to COVID. Now, to go back to where we started, in terms of if there was going to be a time to question the Dubai model, it was then, right? And there could have been... You had this perfect set of circumstances to launch a different model.
Yes.
And then as the dust started to settle, and I would have made the same decision, the Dubai model still has a lot of steam in it.
And that's as clear as day. I agree.
It's because of the events that I mentioned, because of a global polycrisis environment. You have budget deficits in the West. So taxes go up. Governments want to get their hands in your pocket.
Yes.
And a lot of people, particularly, and this is kind of goes back to where America was in kind of the middle of the 19th century, kind of 1850. You know, you had the largest inward migration from Europe into America at that stage. And by 1910, it was about 22%, I think, if I remember correctly, of the labor population was foreign born. And America was the new world and everybody was going there. And the people who went were the people with the get up and go.
Yes.
It wasn't the people who were sitting on their backside. It was the people with the get up and go. And they're the people you want. You know, if you're looking at Dubai in terms of per capita, everyone talks about per capita GDP. I'd be curious about per capita growth mindset. Dubai is a place that is pulling people in that want to do something.
Land of opportunities,
and they feel like this is the place to be. And that's why there's a lot of steam in this model, because Dubai is counter-cyclical in that sense.
100%.
When there's flux and there's this polycrisis environment globally, Dubai is a beneficiary of that. And that used to be over the last few decades.
100%.
That model stays true, but it used to be that they would pull people in from locally in the region, and then it became the broader region when you think of the Arab Spring, and
of course, and the Ukraine war, and all
then
of
it
that,
goes global.
Yeah.
And if you look at over the last couple of years, real estate investment into Dubai, and you look at the major countries where it came from, by and large, and I'm this common thread, I'm looping it together. But when I looked at that data, it was like, okay, you had British coming in and investing post-Brexit. You had Russians, because of the effectively you've Brexit, the government. Russia makes a decision to invade Ukraine, government decision. You had a lot of wealth coming out of China, or the Middle East. It's hard to get your money out of China, but a lot of people are trying to get their money out. And a lot of it, again, that was COVID. in China, right? It was the government. What you have is you have a place that offers lifestyle, stability, safety, access to talent, a diverse talent pool if you're starting a business, infrastructure, and a great place for whether you're whatever stage in life you are.
Yes.
There's something for everybody in Dubai. I think Dubai has this bad reputation in some areas, the bling aspect of Dubai. What's this?
The movie
Toxic program,
that's
and that is
the aware people, the people who are aware, the people who are I would say mature in the way they see and evaluate things. They will see Dubai for the real city it is, which is a welcoming, collaborative.
I love your optimistic view on the world, and the people who are aware for sure, but it's the same kind of cohort of people you're saying who are stressed out on the road, trying to late for work.
100%. And
but they're around the world. I remember I was in LA a couple of years ago. My wife we were there for the summer, and I was getting my haircut.
Okay.
And the guy was saying to me, where do you live? And I was like, I live in Dubai. And he was talking about reality shows about Dubai.
Okay.
Yeah. That was his kind of perspective on it.
Is there a reality show about Dubai?
I think he said there's like, what's the American one? Housewives of Dubai. Or something.
Right.
Anyway, one of these, he had seen, that's how he knew Dubai, something like this. It's kind of this Dubai bling perception. And in a way that works for a lot of the masses because...
And why not? I mean, marketing is a big, let's say, strength of Dubai as a city, which used it to its advantage.
Unfortunately, this works. This is what works, unfortunately.
Which is, I'll tell you what, marketing is a two-edged sword, but if you have the substance to back up your claim, then why not? I mean, I wholeheartedly believe in both the thinking and the feeling. So if you're able to attack the feeling really well and make people and make, kind of pull people in, but then give them a promise. It's like a hook in a movie or in a writing piece or whatever. And then the substance matches the promise, then why not? I mean, I don't mind to have the best hook in the world to hook me in, if I'm able to then be rewarded with that promise. And that's interesting because this is, we 100% agree on everything you said. I 100% agree with everything you said. For instance, when COVID hit, as an expat, I was reconsidering my life choices. It was an existential crisis for me, especially that I'm an expat living in Dubai. I was born and raised here. My father is here since 1971, 1972. But obviously we're living according to the visa regulations and policies, which you hate it, you love it. It is what it is. And I'm a very pragmatic person. So when that hit and my father retired, I started thinking of myself when I'm 60 and 70, and what am I going to do? This is not my country. And obviously, if I retire from whatever job I have to exit. Or I have to invest hundreds of thousands of dollars in this part of the world. And then obviously with all the kind of expenses around it, which is a very expensive place to live. So I started looking at migrating to, let's say, Canada or Australia. I did my IELTS and I hired my lawyer. And then all of a sudden I get the email, which is the golden visa. And I'm like, okay, that didn't come out of a vacuum. So someone somewhere
I'm not, to be clear, I'm not taking any credit for this whatsoever, but I'll tell you the background of how multiple different entities advise the government, but it speaks to how agile and adaptable the government is, right? So when that happened, when the golden visas happened, His Excellency Abdullah bin Tuq had recently became the Minister for Economy. And they had obviously been advised by multiple different parties. So I'm not saying EMIR was the one that made this happen. But what we did was COVID hit, His Excellency came into the ministry, and they were looking at ways of how do we retain the talent.
100%.
Because what they effectively do is they import aggregate demand through expats, right? And if everybody leaves, then there's a problem. So they needed to fix that. COVID happens, and I went to the minister and said, this was you spoke earlier about the kind of sleepless nights of what are we going to do? I obviously had a team paying salaries, and part of what we done then was putting on our events, and you don't need to be a genius to figure out if you're not putting on the events, then some of the members felt like, I get a lot of value from the events.
So they cancel.
Yeah, so we had to move very quickly. And we created a virtual conference with an app, with the minister. We rented a TV studio, all in the space of a week. We redesigned our whole business pretty quickly.
Very agile.
And the first session, we'd over 1,000 executives on. The minister beamed in from his office. And then what we would do is we would push polls and policy loops out to all the participants. You know, what's your input on these potential policies? And then we'd have multiple simultaneous virtual breakout sessions where everybody at home has their app and is able to engage and offer advice. And then we would synthesize all of that and package them up into short policy briefs and then present them to the minister and his team. And very quickly, if you look at a lot of the policies that came from the private sector and from Dubai, the government was able to move so quickly and introduce things like the golden visa and multiple different policies. So that's the benefit of having, that is innovation.
And that's my point. Exactly. Thank you. So when it comes to government, and that's probably what we've been talking about for the past 20 minutes now, government in this part of the world, especially in the GCC and especially in the Emirates, in the United Arab Emirates, Dubai and Saudi, there's no shortage of innovation when it comes to government. And the innovation that comes from government is usually to facilitate living, to facilitate business, to facilitate economy, to facilitate education, to facilitate healthcare. And that's top tier, 100%, no doubt about that. And obviously this is a hard concrete evidence to this, because this email that I've received through a referral from a friend of mine is a result of a think tanks and all those sort of brainstorming sessions. And the very fact that they thought about this, that it was in their awareness, on their radar, is a thumbs up. I mean, this is no easy feat. But that's government. And that's what I'm trying to say. Government is there to facilitate. There was the other day a paper published from Qatar, Saudi, and the UAE, from universities. And the question was, why isn't there innovation in the region, more or less? And the conclusion is governments need to do more. So to be honest, I got furious. It's like, what more do you expect from governments to do? Do you expect them to do apps? Do you expect them to just create economy? I mean, they facilitate, they don't create. And
so there's too much easy money.
Yes.
In other areas of the economy.
Yes.
You know, so if you're in Dubai now, right? Who's making a lot of money, right? It's real estate guys.
Yes.
It's tourism, leisure, retail, you know, they're pulling people in.
And that's what government's trying to do, to diversify, outside of that, through all of those facilitation, for all those sort of encouragement. You mentioned Dubai Future Foundation. So the accelerators that they've done is just pulling what other countries would do in 10 years now to facilitate for entrepreneurs, to facilitate for startups, to facilitate for corporates. I think that what I'm trying to get at is it's the corporates, the family, the private sector is what's lagging behind. And that's sort of counterintuitive.
Yeah, I would, at a glance, we don't
nothing
have data
scientific,
on this.
Nothing scientific, but it looks like sense. This. And when I say culture as those four drivers of innovation, government, capital, talent, and culture, I don't mean macro culture or national culture. I mean corporate culture, a culture that is driven by creativity, driven by merit, driven by opportunity, driven by innovation, real innovation. Now, if you look at it from that perspective, you'll find that we are performing, but because of the easy money, because of how well the governments are doing. And in my world, again, very anecdotally, and that's my field of research, and I'm going into more research on that front. I have a couple of research questions that I need to investigate. That's the danger, because how sustainable is that? You can't run off of governments. Governments, at the end of the day, need to make money. And if they are the ones who solely make money, then that's a dangerous Marxist, socialist sort of...
Well, I think from a multinational point of view, how this works, and I know this very well because most of our clients are multinationals, and our client tends to be the regional CEO or president or VP or MD, whatever their title is. And they report into a global HQ.
Corporate, yeah.
And the board or the exco and the global CEO. And the global CEO comes to town and they wheel me out to have lunch or dinner or breakfast or whatever with the global CEO. And then what I'm confronted by very quickly is the realization of how most times, how little they know about the Middle East.
Yes.
So you're the regional CEO who is trying to get, let's say hypothetically, budget for more commitment towards real R&D here.
Yes. Which is almost non-existent.
That becomes a difficult conversation. Yes. And part of that is you're confronted by issues around a lack of education, awareness from a global board of what's happening in the Middle East. Because unfortunately, they view the Middle East through the keyhole that is BBC, CNN, or God forbid, Fox News or something, right? And what are they getting? They're getting
the wars, the conflicts.
And what they don't see, not all of them, it is improving. And when they come here and they come to Dubai, and we have also facilitated this where they come for a few days and our client, who's the regional CEO, will say, you map out a few days for them. And it's an education process, and we'll bring them to meet ministers. I'll give them a talk. Our colleagues will give them talks. We'll set up round tables. We immerse them in everything. And we'll even bring them to do cool stuff like,
ski slope.
Well, we'd go around Museum of the Future. Right. His Excellency Khalfan Belhoul there is a fantastic guy. And he's so agile and open to, let's show what we're doing here. So we'll get them a kind of a whistle-stop tour around the Museum of the Future and then sit with the right officials. And we've done this, a mind-boggling amount of times.
How do they receive it?
Well, this is what I was about to say. Without fail, every single one of them, I can't remember any of them. We're talking hundreds and hundreds. Any of them being anything less than kind of jaw-dropping. Wow, this is going on here. Now, some of them...
And then how do they act on it?
Well, they come back more.
Right.
We hosted a round table. Big deal. They come back more because they like it. And then what happens is you have to remember you're dealing with human beings.
Yes.
And this human being, their bias, the stereotypes they have of the Middle East, sometimes quite negative connotations. Right?
Yes. So Trevor, let's hone down on this, because this is a very, very interesting discussion. I once had a question in a Q&A session in an event of an executive from those sort of multinationals. And I asked him why, and obviously he couldn't answer, right? He just beat around the bush and that's it. So I'm sort of aware of that. And I was working at a multinational before, and I know exactly the struggle for every penny spent outside of sales and marketing within this part of the world. So that's unequivocally true. So let's do this. We have 3 buckets of creators of innovation. We have the multinationals, we have the private sector, the family offices, let's say large corporates that are based off of here. And then you have the entrepreneurial scene, right? So we kind of tackled the first part, which is, like you said, stereotypical. They have their own whatever that drives their intentions.
It's going to be low.
And I'll tell you what, I don't blame them because they're not from here. I mean,
they have an opportunity cost where they're saying, if I put $1 here, how many dollars am I going to get back? And there's multiple there's
a multifaceted, it's extremely nuanced, and obviously it's unfair to discount it to only whatever that is the human element. That's one part of it, that's one factor, and I agree with you.
And there's IP protection.
And there's IP protection, and there's
which
national.
They're feeling like, is this
and I have firsthand. There's the right wing sort of nationalist sort of, this is us, this is whatever country. So that's that, right? I mean, multinational is just a kind of facade to whatever. So that's that. So, and I don't blame them, honestly speaking. I mean, with being very pragmatic. Whatever it is that they feel, it's their feeling. It is what it is, and it's amoral.
It might be the right move for them.
What I'm trying to say is, it's not. I wouldn't judge as right or wrong. It is what it is, right? But then we have the other two, which is if we 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, there are 2/3, right? You have the massive organizations and the wealth that they've generated here, and then you have obviously the entrepreneurial landscape, which is now growing at an exponential rate. What do you think of those two?
I think on the family businesses, the family trade and conglomerates, so you can obviously speak to some that have done incredibly well in this space, right? In terms of incorporating, again, just incorporating technology into their business.
Yeah.
And providing standards in some areas that are higher than the West.
How did that translate into innovation, production, and exportation?
I would say that is more knowledge transfer that they've brought in, and then they've adapted to the market. I think the entrepreneurial kind of class is only really getting going in many ways in this part of the world. And we talked about the clash between investors and entrepreneurs and how that is sort of stifling. I don't think that's really there yet. And again, your point earlier was an excellent one in terms of the government. What more can you get the government to do? Like, they're literally...
Do you want them to create a WhatsApp? I mean, that's the thing. Do you want them to create a Kareem? I mean, this is not what government's supposed to do. And if they do, then
there's a crowding out effect. You actually, you don't want them to do that because there's a crowding out effect. And if you think of some of the initiatives that the government have launched, the Future 100, which is the 100 kind of innovative techie startup kind of companies that are going to drive the next wave of growth.
Yes.
There's another one that we're working on with the government, which we just launched 2 days ago at Investopia, but we didn't announce yet. So it's going to be announced, I'd imagine, next week or the week after. It'll be in the press. And this also exactly speaks to what you're talking about. But it's a government initiative to support these companies that are the next wave of growth and innovation.
Yes, and that's what I'm trying to say.
And these are the people you're talking about. So we sat around the table, these 50 companies it's going to be, and the government was there. And,
entrepreneurs? Or is it?
I can't say too much about it because it's going to be announced, but they're the people that you're describing.
Nice, okay.
And the minister is saying to these companies, the purpose of the meeting was, tell us exactly what we can do to help you with your next wave of growth. Like, there's not many places you get that in the world where the minister is
not at all.
Bringing you to sit around 100%. The table and say, tell us what we can do for you.
It's always the opposite. It's always, how can we take much money from you, as opposed to how can, it's like everyone, you mentioned that. I mean, governments try to see what ways we can, make money from and dig deeper into your pockets, except here. And this is where my thesis, I think, is governments are doing far and beyond. They're going out of their way just to make sure that everything is facilitated, again, from infrastructure, from telecommunication and connectivity, from education, the education reforms alone is just crazy. And it's pivoting like it's a startup, right? All those charter schools, all of those types of PPP across the education landscape, all those curriculums that they're trying and testing. And then you go into the healthcare and you see how the healthcare here is just superior, generally speaking, from per citizen perspective. And it's just crazy. What more do you, that's where it's kind of blows my mind when anyone, and that's what kind of I got furious about that research study, is like, how dare you ask more from governments after everything they've done? I mean, and I'm a living evidence to that. And you are as well. And we have we're not outliers by any stretch of the imagination. So it just goes back to those three categories.
The companies then, if they're making that easy money, everyone's grown at the moment.
And they're
growing double digit. 40% of our network are growing at over 20%.
Yes, and this is where my initial, remember, thesis, my research, which is that is the what kind of blinds people about the real effect of or the real driver behind innovation, which is corporate culture. So I'll tell you this: the amount of the other day I was having a brainstorming session with a couple of leaders, and they were talking about the concept of brain drain and how it's affecting their productivity, but not to the much that they're not performing. And to them, that's why it's not a priority. So I asked one of the gentlemen there, and I asked him about, the importance of people, especially talented individuals, and how environments are important to be, it's like the soil before you put the seed. And he said everybody's replaceable in one way or shape or form. Like, I could tell that this is his assumption. And while talking to him, he said, "Oh, you know what? I always, he's like this big guy. He has, in his contact list, he has every single facet of his organization. He has tens of them." And he said that. He said that from this I have 10, from that I have 10, from Muhammad I have 10 Muhammads. From if he left, I can just call the next one and he'll come next day. So we kept on talking, and then by the end of that discussion, he mentioned a story of an individual, a leader in his organization that left 5 years ago, and until now, that part of the organization is a mess. And I don't want to mention the name of that individual that left, otherwise I'll give out the story, or the individual. But then I asked him,
is the company still growing?
Yes, 100%. And that's the problem, right? It's 100% growing at an exponential rate, right? So I asked him, and that's objectively speaking as well, not just him.
Yeah.
So, and you can see it. So I asked him, where's the 10, this name? So he said, I have 10 Muhammads. Where's the 10, this name? And because that was 1 hour after he mentioned it. I was like, he laughed. And he looked at me, and I wish I recorded that. And I'm sure he wouldn't say it anywhere else. He looked at me, I was like, Osama, listen, what I said before was not reality. That was ego. He said that. He said that was my ego speaking.
At least he was aware.
He was aware, and he is aware. And that's kind of halfway through. But then through talking, because he was aware, but he wasn't aware. It's like when you have an assumption, but you don't know about this assumption, and your behavior reflects that assumption without you actually knowing about it. So it was brought to his awareness at that point in time. It's like, yeah, you're right. I mean, when I said it, I knew deep down, but I couldn't articulate it well.
I think the crux for our conversation here is the fact that a part of his business is a mess, and yet the business is still grown at a breakneck speed.
No.
So for him, is there a problem? There should be, of course, but there's different shades of problems.
You see what I mean? It's crazy, complicated, and nuanced and multifaceted. But it's extremely unique to this part of the world.
If his business wasn't growing,
oh yes,
he'd be fixing that part of the business.
So here's another small story, right? So and this is a well-known story. So we did GITEX in Morocco last year, and the operational issues that we had is out of this world. So one of the operational issues is people who are contractors from within Morocco used to leave site mid-production. I was like, you know what? The hell with it. I don't care. And when we investigated around that, it was obviously they hated the way the environment is. They hated the kind of culture that we brought from here to there, but they were able to leave because they were from Morocco, if that makes sense. Similarly, in the UK, in Europe, in the States, if someone doesn't like it, they can move into their mom's basement and they don't care. Here, they can't do that. Here, there's the loss of lifestyle, there's the loss of visa, there's obviously the lifestyle that sort of compels you to go to the bank and get a kind of 20 years worth of loan that you're obliged to pay, otherwise you're gonna... So that holds you down and makes sort of this facade of performing, but then how sustainable is that?
But again, you're getting into the philosophy of the social matrix there, right? In terms of there are personal decisions from people in terms of, and everything you articulated there is totally accurate, right? I can see how people would feel those pressures to do those things, but it
translates into Monday morning.
But that comes down to character and strength of character.
So I don't want to sound like it's a capitalist versus a socialist. I'm not by any side. I'm a very capitalist person. An ethical capitalist. However, my discussion is not at the individual. or the company. My individual is at my discussion or my argument is at a nation level. If we're going to be the next big thing, if this wealth transfer from the global north to the global south, like you've mentioned earlier, is happening, and we aspire to be the center of tomorrow, my question is, and honestly, I don't know the answer to it, is our current corporate culture, is our current practices, is the carrot and the stick, is the lack of collaboration and partnership with your employees? I'm talking about the average, not everyone. So your organization obviously doesn't have the carrot and the stick, it has the collaboration and partnership. But is that the control type, the authoritarian, the kind of focus on process? Is it sustainable?
I can't answer that, but what you're describing is just a tension within a capitalistic system that is then trickles down into an organization.
Yes.
Whether we're going to get to a point that you've described, and EMIR is far from perfect. You were being kind there. EMIR is far from perfect in this sense as well. Is there's two not diametrically opposed kind of destinations where you want to get to. They should be joined up, but they're not always joined up. When a company is not doing well, the focus should go on to culture more. You go on to culture if the company still doesn't continue to perform. Then leaders and CEOs start to focus on, okay, I need to steady this ship, or else there will be no ship.
Yes.
Now, what you're describing in terms of a very kind of old-fashioned dictator type corporate culture, which
control type, I would say.
Control type. I'm sure it still exists in different organizations.
But how conducive is it to innovation? I think that's it's not a moral discussion. That's just to be very clear. It's not a good or bad.
It's clearly not good. And it exists.
It stifles innovation, isn't it? Because if you look at the average tenure of an employee in the GCC, on average, it's about 3 years. Now, 3 years, more or less, is far from having it's very, very much contributing to the brain drain of organizations. And innovation only happens if you have your talent capital, which is your most valuable asset in an organization, especially for innovation, because innovation is about inventions, about creativity. It's about bringing an idea, first surfacing an idea, and then having all those ideas, and then this J-curve of ideas, and then one idea will just make up for everybody else. And that needs a soil, that needs an environment that's so fertile for this type of extremely specific outcome.
Yeah.
Right. And I think from an organization's perspective, again, because all other variables are exactly on point. And I love how you just brushed over the macroeconomies of the world and how we're sort of immune. I mean, if I don't listen to the news, I probably wouldn't even know about those issues that happen in the world. And that's a fact, because I go to work, I drive safely, I buy my stuff. I have my electricity on. I have my water. I have my.
And Dubai is booming, right?
And Dubai is booming, exactly.
So you
my
feel like
properties
you're in a bubble.
Exactly, yeah. And that's the. I think the question that keeps me up at night is, until when? And is it a ticking time bomb that we don't know about and we should know about? And I know for a fact that the government and the officials and the people in power, they know this. That's why they have the youth program. That's why they have the Dubai Future Foundation. That's why they have all of these awards for the best employer of choice, the best this, the best that. It's just that when you zoom a bit, when you focus in and zoom in a bit on the corporate cultures and all of these organizations, the thousands and thousands of them that has 50, 100 employees plus, do they really understand the magnitude of corporate culture and the long-term effect that it has on the nation at large, because they're able to generate that much creativity and innovation? And I think this is the question that I keep on asking. I need to see where can I reach from there. I think
there'll be some companies that do.
100%.
And there'll be a whole lot of companies that don't even know what you're talking about. They're not even aware that there is a problem.
How do we make them aware of this problem? Because it's very nuanced, it's very abstract, let's say. It's very metaphysical. Remember the strategy versus culture? Strategy is clear. You must have a strategy. You must have targets. You must have a timeline. You must have tactics. You must have projects. But culture, which everybody taught as eats strategy for breakfast, but then ask them what is culture as an organizational level and how does it impact this strategy, they will start talking, about things that are real, but then it's still talk, right? The incongruence is just...
Yeah, it's like what you said earlier, right? Companies are living organisms, and they're tricky and difficult. But how we make them all aware of this, I guess this is what you're doing, which is fantastic. But I would point to data and say companies that are adopting these practices, and if you can prove this and say, they have this much growth versus companies that are not, that's the only way that you're going to really incentivize companies to move up.
There is I get forwards from people that are in power that I know for a fact that they have zero focus on culture, and they forward to me snippets from Steve Jobs and how he talks about how people are he has to be the least smartest person in the room and everybody has to be smarter than him. They forward to me Jeff Bezos and how he's the last one to talk in a meeting, this famous way of managing meetings and everything. And those same people are the ones who sit at the head of the table. They are the one, no meeting has to start until they come, and they come late to the meeting, and then everything has to happen with their approval. So it's not about knowing about the existence of this construct. And that's, I think, this is one of the reasons, I have no answers. Honestly speaking, I have zero answers. I have all the questions in the world and I'm just trying to get answers. But that's why I'm trying to talk to, leaders like you who have this visibility, because I have zero visibility at that front. I'll call a spade a spade. My background is mostly in technology. I was an employee most of my life. I've never rubbed shoulders with leaders of that size as much as you and the likes of people that sit on that chair. And that's the kind of essence of this escapade, is to ask those questions and see maybe someone somewhere will pay attention. What do you think?
I think it's a brilliant mission you're on, and I think it's important to keep asking these questions. But also you're going to be faced by this myriad of different experiences and, different company sizes,
yes,
the caliber of different organizations, the resources they have. It might be an idea to focus on a specific cohort of companies. I think the family trading businesses, they're big enough that they can move the needle and they have decision-making locally.
Yes.
Whereas a multinational, yes, they have decision-making at the regional level for sure, but they're also dependent on a global corporate strategy, and they're competing against, if they're the CEO for Middle East and Africa, they're competing against LATAM and North America and Europe for resources and budget. And they can move the needle in many interesting ways in an economy when they tie up and collaborate with different organizations or just invest. But if I were you, I would focus on, because it ties in with your mission and it makes it more achievable.
Yeah.
Focus on family trading conglomerates. And they have scale, they have size, they have impact, and you'd access the people at the top who can make decisions, and
that affects here. Yeah.
And it will be of a positive 100%. Benefit to the ecosystem as well.
Yeah. The only slight challenge, and that's what I'm tackling by talking to, let's say, multinational leaders and leaders like you, is that culture and leadership are two faces of the same coin. So when we talk about culture, because of, remember the macrocultural elements and traits that we spoke about earlier about this part of the world, saving face, making sure that they have the best part of them presented. When we talk about culture, we talk about them. It's like talking about your kid. Usually no one likes to kind of diss their kid or talk badly about their kid. So, and I've seen this, especially in my project side. I kind of try to, as much as possible, not even mention culture at any level. mention innovation, process optimization, business model innovation, all of that sort of stuff, but not culture. Where I'm really attacking within the organization is the culture, because there's clear telltales about the impact it has implicitly and explicitly on either the performance or the potential, right? But with the moment you mention culture, I can sense this stone walls that is being built that is almost...
You'd know best there, right? Because you're tackling that topic. I don't talk to organizations about that. But just as a personal observation, I would imagine, it's such a difficult thing to get right. Like I said earlier, like I've made a mess of this for so many years, and I'll continue to get lots of it wrong. And different events happen, right?
The courage
that shape it, that you recognize actually there's a period of time, there's something going on in my life at the moment where I'm taking my foot off things in every sense that is going to damage the business in different ways. Not irreparably so, but you recognize there's different parts of your life and different events happen where you're doing this. You're putting the foot down. You're like, okay, I'm in a good space, and I have space to do this, and it's all going. And there's other times where you have to give your focus to other people and other aspects of your life. So to take it personally. Of course, you're going to take it personally to a certain extent because it's your business, but I don't think anyone, or I'd hate to think, maybe I'm wrong here, but you'd hate to think any of your teammates think that you're invincible, that you're going to have this right. If you're getting this like 60% right, that's moving the needle.
Yes.
But a big chunk of the time, you're not gonna be getting it right. But if you're not focusing on it at all, there's a big difference between 0 and 60%.
Yes.
And then it also depends on the scale and size of the company. Now, I have had a lot of regional CEOs over the last kind of decade. What happens is they join our network because it is of value to their organization. But also, of course, they're meeting with other high caliber leaders, and your network also becomes your personal network. It's a benefit to organization, but it's a benefit to you and potentially future opportunities or crises that you may face. And that's when your network really counts. And I've had a lot of them over the years would come to me and we go for coffee. And I even know by the WhatsApp message what the conversation is going to be before they say it. It's basically they're thinking of their next move, and a lot of them have been offered, or a few, I can think of a few off the top of my mind, have been offered, they've been a regional CEO of a big multinational. They are high-powered executive, high-functioning, high-performing person. They're on it, basically, very conscientious, very driven, well-adjusted people, just smashing things, basically, just doing really well. And everything seems to come easy to them. And then they get offered a chief transformational role in a family trading conglomerate. So big company, and they see this and they think, and I know a few that have done it, as I say, where they think, oh, this would be fun. It's big company, big resources, and they're being brought in mainly by the patriarch of the family to exactly focus on what you so admirably talk about and are passionate about, is how to transform the business and bring innovation in, basically. And on 2 of those instances, they go into the organization, and the very person who hired them to do the transformation becomes the person that then blocks the transformation.
Blocks, 100%.
Because now, this is where you're operating in a vacuum of evidence, right?
Yeah.
Again, it's hard to break down the counterfactual.
Right?
Well,
sensitivity,
not even so much that, but you have to remember that we're assuming that the patriarch is wrong.
Yes.
They may very well be right, depending on what their definition of success is.
It's very organic.
Yeah, but I typically hear back from one side, and they say, oh, I've been blocked to do this, and now I'm leaving because they brought me in to do this, but they don't really want to. When it comes down to doing the change,
And that's happening more times than I would wish it to happen. I mean, just the other day, I had also an executive who was brought in as a CEO for a local organization. 3 months in, I don't know if he was sacked or he resigned, but obviously he called me and said, you know what, it didn't click with the board.
But I know someone, we just had breakfast the other morning for one of the biggest multinationals in the world, a government. And I won't say obviously which company, and the exact same thing. So it's not just family trading businesses. And
obviously it's not just here, it's everywhere in the world.
It also happens one of the biggest companies in the world. And you can imagine the hiring process for that to happen, culture fit, months and months. And she had quite a traumatic experience through the whole thing. She couldn't believe it.
And yet it wasn't as she expected.
No.
So let me end with this. What do you see EMIR in 10 years? All of this?
Good question. You know, again, this kind of comes back to the pearls of wisdom that Amit from Nexa had mentioned to me before, that I alluded to earlier. And the second one was, and I have to decide, because I'm just enjoying things, so I have to decide whether I end up at this point. But he said at a certain point that he decided that he would build a business for legacy, as in just to hand it over to somebody else at some point, like as in he'll potentially never sell it. It's not about money. It's about just building something really interesting and cool and seeing where it is at the end, like literally the end. And that kind of rang around my mind quite a bit, because I thought, I like that idea of what could you turn this into? Because it's really, in many ways, I see the direction of what can be plugged into it. It's only kind of, the cool stuff is beginning. Because when you bootstrap something yourself, the foundations are built in a much more kind of secure way. You're not trying to pay back investors or anything like that. And that interests,
you have mental clarity on.
And that interests me. And now we're pulling in like lots of really high caliber. Your analogy earlier of, you know, bringing in a Ronaldo or a Messi into a football team. Now we're bringing in like 15, 20 of them.
Wow.
You know, like Dr.
That's a tsunami if you're not ready for.
Yeah. But again, the idea is that they have businesses within the business. So everyone, when you are interacting with very
senior,
kind of high functioning people, you know, they're better than me. I'm not going to be managing them
individually.
You say to them, what you have to do is align interests.
Right.
And are we all in a good fit and heading in the same direction? And this is where we have to pull things together. It's like, how do we get everybody that they're running around town, so to speak, driving what is good for them, but that in turn ends up being good for EMIR, and then maximizing those benefits with the network effect. So everyone wins.
So the A, B, C, D, which one do you think is the highest growth in 10 years? Not strategically.
I'd say if we get the D part, the C and the D, I think, and the B is the trusted relationships.
Yes.
So in many ways, EMIR will be a totally different company in 5 years, and everything about it will change. The brand, the messaging. There's certain things, like we discussed earlier about Dubai, there's certain things that work now in your messaging that will get you so far, and then that shifts. So it's an interesting time, and it's fun to see where it can go and where it's come from, because, you know, it started off, it was me, I bought a laptop and an iPad. I think the first iPads were out. Yeah, I had an iPad. I went and bought a laptop and an iPad, or a Mac and an iPad, and I have a photo of it, which is very odd. And I would say to anybody starting a business, it's an odd thing to say, but take photos of the space that you're working from at the beginning. It might be, in my instance, it was like basically our kitchen and a spare bedroom.
Wow.
and
that's a legacy.
Take photos of them, because when I look at that photo where I used to work from at the very beginning, it's
motivational.
Yeah, it's very cool.
Very aspirational and motivational, I know. Thank you very much for this time, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you, my friend. And I admire your mission and the purpose behind it. And I can see how passionate and articulate you are about it. I know it's all going to come to fruition. So
thank you.
Thank you very much.